You're listening to the Getting Smart podcast. I'm Mason Pasha. We've spent the last 4 years talking about how to build new pathways that set all learners on a path to success and what's next, whether that be employment, enrollment, or enlistment. Throughout these conversations, we've primarily focused on how pathways programs are crucial on ramps for young people, helping them learn what opportunities are available and how they could get connected with them. Another huge part of the equation, and one that we talk about less frequently, is how pathways are an iterative process, as much about the off ramps as they are about the on ramps. Today, I'm joined by Michael Horn, repeat guest and author of numerous books, including co authoring the new Job Moves 9 Steps for Making Progress in Your Career, alongside Ethan Bernstein and Bob Mosta. Job Moves uses the jobs to be done theory, the notion that customers buy products to solve problems, and applies it to our careers. Cast in this light, jobs are positions we hire to help us make progress in our lives. By understanding your priorities for a job at the specific moment when you make each move, you can identify what's driving you, the experiences you hope to gain, what trade offs you're willing to make, and how to learn if a new job will deliver before switching. Michael, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, it's great to be back on the show. Great to have you interviewing me and maybe an upgrade from Tom. We'll see how that goes. Don't tell him until he listens.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely leaving that in. I think I'm going to just pull that out of the blurb before I even
Yeah,
start
there you
talking.
go. It's our headline.
Incredible. I think you might be our most repeated guest. This is, I think, time number 4 for you.
I am actually truly honored by that. You may not know this, but Tom was someone I totally looked up to and idolized as I was getting into this space. And I think I was the young punk that he was wondering, is he could actually stick in education? It's been really fun to have him sort of mentor and guide and then become collaborators with you all is great.
I did not know that context, but definitely can see you as a young punk. So that's awesome. So, Michael, how did you, Ethan, and Bob link up for this great new project?
Yeah, so all three of us share Clay Christensen as a mentor in some capacity. Bob created the jobs to be done theory with Clay in the mid 90s. Ethan was one of he was his dissertation advisor while Ethan was doing his doctoral work. And Clay obviously was my mentor with whom I wrote Disrupt in Class. And we founded the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation together. And so we had this shared sort of background. We were all in each other's orbits. We became friends, but we largely operate in pretty different spheres. And then it's a confluence of events happened. One, Ethan saw Bob do one of his somewhat famous jobs to be done interviews where he interrogates someone for why they hired a certain product or service to make progress in their lives. And he was like, man, I was giving career advice to someone in my office earlier today. And I realized it was completely useless because I have no idea why they're looking for a new job. And if I had only interviewed them like Bob just did, maybe I would have had better insight. And so then the two of them started this collaboration over many years of courses and research and so forth. And then parallel process, Bob and I wrote Choosing College together. And frankly, I started using the frameworks and insights on myself as I was navigating my own career options. And Bob started interviewing and leading me through stuff to help me make better choices. And then when Clay Christensen died in January of 2020, the three of us and many in Clay's orbits were really pulled together. And the three of us said, we have this emerging body of research and work. We think we all ought to collaborate and honor him by turning it into a book. So that was the genesis of the book idea, but the research had dated back till 2009 or 2000.
That's a beautiful origin story. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Give me some more information about what it means to hire your job. You said it's like Bob's idea, but give me some more.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just origins of the jobs to be done theory was basically that people don't buy products or services for their own sake. They hire them to make progress in their lives in some meaningful way. And so the analogy that always gets tossed around is people don't buy 1/4-inch drills because they're obsessed with 1/4-inch drills. They want 1/4-inch holes, right? And the same we realized is actually true in the world of jobs and employment, although we generally don't talk about it that way. We think, gosh, I hope companies hire people and I hope they hire me and all this stuff. But the reality is that when you choose to work somewhere, you are also hiring that company or that job to make some sort of progress in your life as well. You have agency, right? You're deciding these are the benefits and so forth that I'll take in return for the work that I'm going to do. And so you have actually much more power, if you will, in that relationship than I often think people bring into the conversation of where am I going to work next.
That makes a lot of sense. And do you find is that something that applies once you hit a certain point in your career where where you feel like you have the confidence to make those decisions rather than taking whatever you can get? Or how do you view that as far as it progressing along your age band or wherever you fall?
Yeah, I think people become more aware of it. You're right, as they go through their careers. But I think the major argument in the book is this is actually true from day one when you take that first job.
Mm,
And that a lot of people, they sit there, crossing their finger. Or like when you ask them how you got your last job, they'll be like, oh, I played the numbers game. It was bound to work out eventually. Or, I was in the right place at the right time. And what we've seen from the research of over 1,000 individuals switching jobs is that there's a causal process in place that plays itself over and over again. And ultimately, individuals have far more choice than they think that they do
mm.
in the matter, even when that doesn't feel like that they have choices. I will say though, in nod to your question, we originally wanted to call the book "Hire Your Next Job," and the publisher was like, "Nope, can't do that because no one thinks about it this way except later in their career." And you're like, "Oh man, you're right." So I think that's true. And the big argument of the book is actually you do get to hire your next job. But to do so, you have to understand what progress looks like for you, what your priorities are,
Mm.
and that's the big mindset shift is how do you uncover that and start to be able to tell people what it is you really want to do, not what you want to be, because that's the other mistake people often make. They're like they want the fancy title or the great sounding thing, but that's a short-term return on ego. It's a long-term failure as a plan. You much want to more focus on what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis.
That's super important. I remember the first time that I made a connection with the thing that I thought I was going to do when I was 13, which was be a songwriter and take this nugget of I was doing that forever, and then I got to a place where I was like, I'm either gonna have to surrender a lot of are like things that I view as artistry to make this happen and get really lucky, or I can do something else and keep this alive in a way that feels generative to me. But I found the nugget within writing songs that I actually cared about, which was something more along telling stories. And I was able to transition that into a bunch of other lines of opportunity and work. And so I totally relate to figuring out what progress is for you rather than just taking the title that
Can we
resonates.
geek? Yeah, can we geek out actually on that for a moment?
Of
Because
course.
like, yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm seeing the guitars behind you, and I had seen those before because they've been staples in your background, I think, for a while. But
Yeah.
the I think what's so cool about that and interesting is you didn't settle for a surface level explanation of what drives your energy. You actually were like, what's the why underneath this? And you really got to, oh, it's storytelling. Oh, I can do that in lots of places. All of a sudden that opens you up. You're still having your energy driven as you make career choices. And here's the second thing that I think people don't realize is they want that perfect job that's going to deliver on every single dimension. The reality is that job does not exist. There like every job has some element of suck in it. And so what you did is really savvy, which is you're like, okay, music is not going to be my full-time thing. I'm going to do this where I get to do storytelling, but music, I don't know everything you do, but I'm sure it's a side hustle, right? It's a gig on the side that you still do and keep up
Mhm.
with. And so you still get the fulfillment of music without all the BS that would have drained your energy around it if it was your full-time professional career. And that's something we saw with a lot of the successful job movers in the data sets that we looked at and coached is that those who are able to think about their life more holistically and be like, okay, I'm not going to get this here, where else can I get it and put it around me? They were able to create a portfolio life, if you will, that had the major things that they wanted.
Yeah, that really resonates. Within the book, you break down these 9 steps for making progress in your career. And as I was reading through them, I kept thinking about a lot of the like futures thinking training that I'd been going through over the last few years. You look back to look forward, you create this sort of like story spine, and you focus on drivers and drains. And then there was something about these possible futures with career prototypes, which I think we're both sort of dancing around right now. But Can you give a little bit of a voiceover on what these career prototypes are? And then we'll probably return to some of that other stuff throughout the
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah. And just to note, some of this is right, like not new to those points of those other steps. It's really how do we package it in the context of careers and jobs themselves.
Totally.
On the prototypes, I think this is a major breakthrough of the book, which stays with this thing that you're calling out, which is there's no perfect job. And when you ask someone to figure out like what's the one thing you want to do next, that's actually really hard to figure out because you're like, oh, but that won't have this or that won't have that. Or you get fixated on the one thing and then you maybe someone like you takes that musician professional route and all of a sudden is completely unfulfilled in a whole bunch of dimensions, right?
Right.
Because you anchored on something that didn't get you the progress you wanted. And the big argument in the book is that first we actually want to diverge, right, in prototyping. We want to come up with 3 to 5 very different futures for what you could do next so that you can actually start to figure out what are your priorities are at the moment. What are the energy drivers? What are the capabilities you want to invest in that are most important to you at this stage of your life and career? And where are you willing to make trade-offs? Where are you willing to say, like, in an ideal world, storytelling would coincide with writing music for me, but I'm willing to make that trade-off because I get these 5 other things, or I don't have to give up this sort of control or whatever it is. And by doing that, then we help people converge on that one prototype that is going to become the thing that they go out to the market and really shop around to go find, where they have a lot of detail around this is what I want to do on a day-to-day basis. These are the trade-offs I'm willing to make in terms of what drives my energy and on so that I can get these things that matter most to me. And just to give a couple examples, like we've worked with individuals who, instead of taking $400,000, they took 250K in salary. And we're like, what the heck did you just do that for? And I get to be around an awesome entrepreneur and learn from that person. I
Hmm.
get to work from home. So I get to be around my kids more, no long commute to work, blah, 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 blah. And we're like, that's amazing. And then he was able to say, and you know what? I'm not going to complain about the fact that I'm making 150K less because I intentionally chose that trade off so that I could get all these other benefits that I
Hmm.
wouldn't have gotten in the other version. And that's really a great example, I think.
So at Getting Smart, we just put out a new publication around the credentialing landscape, and we did a bunch of research on how HR views it, how employers view it, and how higher education in particular views credentialing. And we got to see some pretty exciting examples of new transcript models or ways of storing experiences. I'm curious, in this world where you are more aware of the trade-offs that you're making and you've built these career prototypes, are those just like internal stories you're telling yourself to help you navigate? Are those things that you foresee people being able to project into the world? How do you view those as like a navigation tool?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it pushes the bounds of what we had written. But what I think the way we'd conceptualized it is it becomes external product that the work you do in understanding your energy drivers, the capabilities you want to have, and capabilities or assets, to be clear, are skills, knowledge, credentials, network. Like it's all these things. It's an accumulation of those things. And like assets anywhere, they depreciate over time. And so you have to make investments to keep them up to snuff. And that involves more learning and upskilling and reskilling and so forth. Um, and so, in my mind, those do get shared externally through a few mechanisms over time. Number one, we talk about creating your story spine or the Pixar story, basically, right? Which is
Mm.
the 30-second version of where you've been in your career, what you've learned about yourself, the things you've done, and where you now want to go and why this is the next step for you. And what's interesting, like we coached a number of individuals in the course of researching and writing this book who would basically go to their manager and be like, okay, I get it. There's not an obvious place for me here, but this is what I've learned about myself and blah, 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 blah. Tell the story. And then the manager would be like, start helping them find a new job. And then midway through, be like, actually, wait a second. Like, we've never had, agile product development for consumer packaged goods in this company. But if that's what you want to do, let's go create that role internally and do that here. And they're like, sweet, don't have to leave and so forth. And so I think that's one output. The second one we talk about is the personal cheat sheet, which is
Mm.
basically how do you do your best work? What are the capabilities and skill sets you bring? You can very easily imagine that somehow being packaged, right, in some of these new transcripting tools and learner employment records and the things that you all have dug into.
Yeah.
And I guess the third thing I would say is I also left this book feeling like feeling a lot of things, but among them that we talk a lot in education about skills-based hiring,
Yeah.
and I have become really skeptical of skills-based hiring in the narrow way that I think it's portrayed, which is, okay, we're going to forget about credentials and we're instead going to look at like skills. But the problem is employers, like when they use the phrase critical thinking, A, they mean very different things by it, but
Yeah.
B, I actually don't think they always know what they mean by it. And C, they don't know which are the best employees, what are the skills that they really have. And my takeaway from that is it's much more important to look at the actual experiences and what you do, the tasks, because
Yeah.
those are more concrete and definable. And it's more easily understood by the individual as well because they can be like, oh yeah, I was on a small team that did X, Y, and look at this. It's really, I think it's actually an easier way to communicate individual to employer, and then let the education institutions figure out, okay, if Mason's going to be a storyteller in this genre, this is the skills that we need to help him build up
Mm.
so that he can better do that. Let the education organizations worry about what that is,
Yeah.
but let the lingua franca, if you will, be in terms of experiences and what you do on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis.
Yeah, in our research, we were finding that experiences were evidence of a skill applied. So, like, you could actually they all exist together, but really you need them all to make a compelling narrative of what you've done.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah. And I almost think there's a guy at USC, McCall, who did this years ago of like schools of experience for figuring out how to
Mm.
hire leaders and basically being like, and we all know this, that just because you were a successful like CEO of a large company doesn't mean you're going to be a successful CEO of a turnaround with the startup or something like that.
Yeah.
Two totally different contexts. I'd much rather have the person who was the chief of staff on the turnaround with a successful CEO at a small company jump into that CEO role. And yes, it's the next step for them, but they've had the experience and evidence and skill set that they've developed to be able to do that. I think that's a much more promising path forward. And to your point, it's all integrated, but I think it gives clearer language that we can actually understand. I also think, by the way, it means that job descriptions ought to be rewritten in pretty significant ways. And instead of the laundry list of 500 skills and credentials I want someone to have, and on a webinar earlier today, someone said, I'm looking for a caterpillar's requirement 5 years of having been a butterfly, which I thought was hilarious. But basically like actually job descriptions reflecting what do you do in this
Yeah.
role and what are the sorts of evidence or experiences we would accept to show us that you can do these sorts of things. And then again, the education organizations that you go to would help you build up the skill sets to be able to do those things.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And that's storytelling again, right? Like it's storytelling from the perspective of the company. What is a day in the life? And I remember being struck by my wife went through a fairly intensive interview process a year or two ago. And she, when it was her time to ask the questions to the employer, she asked a question that was like, in 2 sentences, like, how do you leave every week feeling to the
Hmm.
people that were hiring her? And that answer was pretty much like the thing that sold her on the company because everybody had given a pretty similar answer and it was exactly how she wanted to leave the weeks feeling, which coupled with how I'm going to spend every day was like the thing. So she's much wiser than I am, but I thought that was a great question. Just before we leave storytelling, I'm curious, do you have your story spine? Can you give our listeners your 30-ish second story spine?
It depends on where you want the departure, I think, is for me a little bit, but I'll do one of them, which
Yeah.
is basically once upon a time, I was leading the Christensen Institute and my twins were born. And ever since that day, I realized I was starting to spend more time thinking about how do I free up time to work with them and not manage others in the organization and the team that I had built. And so since then, I started realizing that I really get excited about new ideas in the space, articulating them and storytelling them. But I didn't want all the bureaucracy of meetings and managing people and so forth. And so ever since that day, I started to seek out roles that would give me that ability to jumpstart and spark ideas and tell stories and
Mm.
to inspire people, but I didn't want to be the person actually operating. And so that led me to the gig economy in effect.
That's great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, let's more fully make the connection back to education. There's this idea that you can hire your job. I, there is no high schooler in America that thinks that they can do that. Like
Yeah.
it is sort of like I have to get lucky to find a job. Even my friends who are right now, a lot of them are making sort of like their first real big career transition. It's a tough job market. They're like,
Yeah.
I can't get anything. All these people that have been laid off in tech are like really rocking the job market, the job hunt. And I'm in Seattle, so it's a little biased up here. But the what is your advice to high school, both high school students and K-12 faculty for how would you take what you've learned about jobs and transpose that into an education context?
Yeah. What I would say first is that if what they're thinking of is like the odds of getting hired when you are one of 300, 400, 1,000 applications online to a single job, they're absolutely right. It is a really tough market. Employers have slowed down the hiring process, frankly. They are taking longer to fill roles, whether it's because of a real or perceived skills gap, it doesn't matter. They're taking longer. And so that is absolutely true. What I would also say, if you're looking to find fit, I think there's never been a better time to be in the job market. And what I mean by that is really getting crisp about what you want to do and the trade offs that you're willing to make. And instead of applying blindly to jobs online, aggressively networking and meeting people, not to find the job initially, but to find out the jobs that they hold. How do they map onto this prototype around what you want to do? And then when you find real fit where the things that you want to do really land with the types of people in the organization or in the job that do the sorts of things that line up with what gives you energy, then you're like one of three competing for a job. And that's when you get an unfair advantage. And so I would say, I think the ways we've been taught to apply for jobs, whether online or these days using AI, frankly, to craft our resume and send out 1,000 cover letters and et cetera, et cetera. I think that's deeply misleading us right now. And I would say job switching is really fundamentally a social process. And so you have to spend a lot of time with individuals. It can feel slow and arduous, but I think the return in terms of fit, reward, and actually finding something is likely to be much, much higher.
And let's put on like a five, honestly, maybe like a 2 year time horizon hat. People like LinkedIn all are announcing more of like AI, HR, and I think AI is it's entering on both sides at the same
Yeah,
time.
that's the thing.
And do you foresee it like 2 years, the social piece of it still being as prevalent, or how would you communicate a story spine in a world of AI recruiters where the arguably maybe isn't the thing that sells them?
Yeah. So here's my take, which is that even before AI, roughly 70% plus of jobs were filled by someone through who you knew. So the network.
Yeah.
And my take is that AI is actually going to make that even more
Mm.
because, as you just said, AI for a long time has been filtering out resumes based on keywords. And now we have AI on the behalf of individuals applying to the AI on the applicant tracking systems. So in effect, we have AI talking to AI, and we know the job descriptions are looking for unicorns because they've listed 1,500 skills that they would ideally want to try to filter people out. And we know the AI is embellishing the resume. And so no one is trusting either side of the process. And my belief is that hiring managers are going to actually default even more to trusted people in their network
Mm.
to, as evidence, show me the evidence. And so I actually think social capital is going to become more important, not less important. And being able to tell your story is going to become more important, not less important. And showing evidence of actually being able to do the stuff of the job is going to become more important, not less important. And so that's my take. I think AI right now is automating the worst artifacts of the job finding process. And so it's going to make it feel really awful over the next few years. And the people who are successful are those who are going to go around the process and use people to find what they want to do.
So
Cool.
I've got a couple things that stood out to me. One thing you said earlier that I just really wish for all, particularly high school graduates, is everybody can leave being able to describe how they do their best work. You
Yeah.
named that with regard to somebody in more of a workplace setting, but if every high schooler could say, these are the conditions that facilitate my best work, I think that would be a huge step in the right direction for like outcomes for high schoolers. And then secondarily, again, sucker for a story, but every high school student should have a story spine, even if it is not conducive and full of work experiences. Like, what is your 30-second elevator pitch for why the things that like spark your brain, why do they do that? And how do you understand the choices that you've made up to this point?
Yeah. First, let me just quickly get like plus one, the high school grads leaving high school, knowing what drives your energy and the capabilities you have and what you're good at. And also importantly, like what you suck at and don't want to do,
For sure.
invaluable. And it is sad right now that most high schoolers leave with no conception of either,
Yep.
or misconceptions, frankly, on what they suck at because of the way high school works. The second one, I love the story thing that you drew on that. And I think you can draw on the places you've gotten energy from your extracurriculars, from
Totally.
the projects you've worked on that were meaningful, from when you were on sports teams and you led a group to something. Like those are where you can draw that from and get that spark for you. And what I think we know, frankly, that colleges even are starting to default to is they don't want broad and an inch deep. They want someone who has evidence of like really getting passionate and exciting about a set of activities.
Yep.
If you can extract what was really meaningful about that, A, it's going to be more authentic and come off the page. Like storytelling is best when it's authentic.
For sure.
And secondly, we know stories are how we learn actually and how we communicate. Like that was while we don't do Homeric or commit Homeric poems to memory anymore, the written word took that out. And I'm sure AI will change this as well. I'm still sure that our brains are wired for stories. And if you can tell yours with authenticity and real learning, you will stand out.
I was really hoping that you were gonna take that. Well, we don't commit these to memory anymore, and then just go full Homer for the
Yeah.
next. And I think it's represented by your experience as well with your 30-second story spine. You have tons of work experience, and still the core events were your twins and like wanting to be around them and the trade-offs that you were choosing to make. And the jobs felt more like places that you had been or were trying to get to. And like they weren't necessarily the catalysts within your story in the same
Exactly.
way. I think that's super important. Michael, a pleasure to talk to you. What is next for you? What can our listeners expect to see? You have a great Substack. You've got a bunch of stuff going on all the time, podcasts, books. What's up?
Yeah, it's a great question. I will tell you, I've gotten a few pitches to write another book, and I have about negative energy at the moment around that proposition. So I'm frankly really excited for conversations with educators and job seekers around the book job moves so that I can learn more. Frankly, I learned a couple new things in this conversation today as well around connecting the work you had done around artifacts to what I'm observing about skills and tasks and experiences. And so I'm really excited just to be collaborating and learning from that over the next year and see where it goes. I am convinced, as you are, that experiential learning is going to become more and more important at all levels of schooling as the world around us changes faster than ever before. So I'm excited to be part of that conversation.
That's awesome. And we're grateful to have you in the conversation. I'll keep an eye out for the third part of the Iliad Odyssey trilogy to be authored by Michael Horn. I think that would be pretty great. And Michael, just a treat to talk to you today. Thanks for making the time.
Mason, thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Getting Smart podcast today. We want this podcast to be actionable, insightful, and a great way to learn about what's next in learning. In order to stay on the cutting edge, we need people in the field to tell us what they're hearing, what they're wanting, and what they're needing to learn more about. Got a topic or a guest in mind? Send your recommendations to me, Mason at gettingsmart.com. And if you like what you're hearing, don't forget to leave a review in Apple Podcasts or subscribe wherever you listen. Feel free to share the podcast on social media using the hashtag GSPodcasts. Thanks so much.